Good morning and welcome to all attendees to this webinar today. On the following subject, we're going to be discussing South Africa and Norway and the road towards 100% electric car sales. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the Norwegian experience and then looking also at how this how we can learn from this in South Africa. My name is Chris Yelland, and I am the Managing Director at EE Business Intelligence, and I'll be your host at this webinar, signed in from Johannesburg. Welcome also to our presenters, who will be introduced to you in due course. I will share a link with you now on the Zoom chat facility, where you can download the presenter biographies. So please do take a look on the chat facility and click on the link if you want to download the presenter biographies. And of course, a big welcome to you, the attendees, for your interest and participation today. This webinar is hosted by EE Business Intelligence. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Electric Mission, the Norwegian Electric Vehicle Association, the Institute for Global Dialogue, and the African Climate Foundation for their valued support for this webinar and for the great work that they do in this field. Some 920 delegates have registered to attend this webinar to hear what the presenters have to say on the subject. This attests to the relevance of the subject matter being covered, as well as to the stature of the presenters. So may I thank you again, presenters, for your participation and for the time and effort that you have put in. Please do note that this webinar is being recorded, and links to view the webinar on demand and to download all the presentations will be made available tomorrow morning to all those who registered to attend, as well as publicly. Colleagues, this webinar explores some of the latest advancements and product and service offerings in the field of battery energy storage and electric vehicles. Norway has been in the fast lane to electrify its passenger car sales, and in the first half of 2025, all electric cars made up to a record of 94.3% of new car registrations in Norway. In a bid to electrify road transport to help meet Norway's climate commitments, the Norwegian Parliament agreed on the National Transport Plan for 2018 to 2029 to have all new car sales as zero emissions by 2025. The government of South Africa launched the National Green Transport Strategy in 2018, which outlines a strategic pillar to promote hybrid and electric cars towards 2050 to combat 91.2% of road transport sector related emissions from transport. So while South Africa had its first electric car sold into the local market as early as 2013, the country has been slow in adopting electric vehicles so far. And in its attempts to meet the reduction of transport sector emissions to be climate neutral by 2025. So we're going to hear about insights and the lessons that South Africa can take from Norway's journey towards nearing 100% electric car sales, and from the policies and charging infrastructure to consumer preferences for electric vehicles. We're going to hear about Norway's Think and Buddy electric cars scheme in the early 1990s and how we can learn from this. So it's really great to have you here, audience. The program for the day has been widely circulated, but a link to download the program again will be shared here now on the Zoom chat facility. So again, please take a look at the chat facility where you'll find the link to download the proceedings for today. The first two speakers will each provide a 10-minute address to introduce and contextualize the webinar today. And thereafter, two expert presenters will each have a 30-minute slot to make their presentations. After which, we're going to have a 30-minute open discussion and Q&A session for our presenters to answer just some of your questions before we close for the day. So while the presentations are in progress, please do send your questions on the Zoom Q&A text facility. You may also put up your hands to ask questions verbally during the Q&A slot. So without further ado, I'm now going to introduce our first VIP speaker, and I'm going to ask him to switch on his mic and his camera while I introduce him. And this is Dr. Pelani Mtembu, who's the Executive Director for the Institute for Global Dialogue. Pelani heads the IGD, which is an independent foreign policy think tank based in Tshwane, Pretoria, South Africa. He holds a master's degree in international relations from the University of the Witwatersrand and a PhD magna cum laude jointly from the Graduate School of Global Politics at the Freie Universität in Berlin, Germany, and the School of International Studies at Renmin University in Beijing, China. His dissertation was on the rise of emerging powers as sources of development cooperation in Africa. Pelani has single-authored a book titled China and India's Development Cooperation in Africa, The Rise of Southern Powers, and he's also co-edited several other books on international development. So really great to have you here, Pelani, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Of course, China is a major player in the electric vehicle market in their technologies and batteries. So it's really great to have somebody who is really expert on South Africa, China, and India relations, because these are going to be major trading partners for electric vehicles in South Africa going forward. And we hope also in the local manufacture of electric vehicles in South Africa. So with that, over to you, Pelani. We're looking forward to your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, colleagues, for the invitation. I'd like to just highlight a few areas sort of related both to South Africa and Norway's interest in this area, how they are cooperating, I think, on the international front, but also just as you said, Chris, I think one of the important things as we see increased tariffs, as we see a changing international trade landscape, but also whilst countries like South Africa remain committed to an industrial path, I think it becomes increasingly important that issues such as green industrialization are addressed, but also increasingly what types of policies countries like South Africa have to adopt. And we know that we discussed this within the framework of South Africa's G20 presidency throughout 2025. Now, while South Africa is committed to a just energy transition, it also seeks to balance various interest groups within the economy, whilst aiming for what it refers to as an energy mix within the country. We've seen in recent years the importance of energy security. This has been adequately demonstrated in recent years as the country's energy producer seeks to improve its own efficiencies whilst also moving towards a path of the just energy transition. This is absolutely vital if South Africa and Africa are to indeed industrialize, create more jobs locally, but also regionally, whilst integrating better into existing global value chains. South Africa's G20 presidency has also committed itself to the just energy transition and tackling challenges that are related to the financing of the just energy transition. And there's very robust engagements taking place within South Africa among civil society actors, with the business community, state-owned enterprises, and various policymakers on how to finance South Africa's just energy transition, but also to hold countries in the global north accountable for the commitments they have made towards financing the just energy transition. And that is going to become important if we are indeed to make more progress in terms of South Africa's existing commitments. But also, I think, in terms of how we have tackled the issue, within the framework of the G20. We know that the think tanks within the G20 who constitute what is referred to as a T20, they have 5 task forces. One of those task forces is accelerating climate action and the just energy transition. And we recently submitted a set of recommendations to the Sherpas meeting, the third Sherpas meeting that took place recently in South Africa. Part of the recommendations included the likes of the need to promote value addition and fair benefit sharing in critical mineral value chains for equitable green industrialization. And of course, here there was also reference to the G20 critical minerals governance framework, but also to look at what opportunities can Africa, countries in the global south, and other countries throughout the world take when it comes to utilizing critical minerals and ensuring that they are not just following an extractive approach, but that they are also moving up the value chain. The think tanks also put forth some recommendations like the need to champion comprehensive whole of society, whole of economy, just transition taxonomies, and the need to exercise political leadership in the United Nations FCCC negotiations to secure concrete outcomes and the means of implementation for just transitions at a global and also local levels. There was also an emphasis on the need to deepen G20 engagement on insurance to enhance resilience and disaster risk responses, and also integrate climate and biodiversity nexus solutions with bioeconomy principles within the G20 agenda. So these are some of the issues that the think tanks and the task forces, at least Task Force 5, within the T20 emphasized when handing over a set of recommendations. And I think these definitely relate to the subject of this webinar. But also it's important to remember that recently Norway adopted a new strategy for Norwegian engagement with African countries. And this was adopted in last year, 2024. And Norway's interests have been partly determined by factors such as its geographic location as a small coastal state in the high north, its open economy, and its dependence on international law and effective global institutions. And relations between South Africa and Norway have been founded on strong Nordic support and solidarity during the struggle for freedom in South Africa. Now, today, the two countries cooperate on a wide range of issues, interlinking issues that include global health, climate change, renewable energy, the blue economy, peace and reconciliation, multilateralism, and also trade and investment. And South Africa and Norway also cooperate closely on women, peace, and security, partnering on the Gertrude Schopper Annual Dialogue Forum on conflict resolution and peacemaking in Africa. Now, today's discussion, I think, is a great opportunity to enhance this engagement between South Africa and Norway, and to better understand one of the pillars of the new strategy for Norwegian engagement with African countries, which of course is issues like climate change, the just energy transition, green industrialization. And I think this is important. Now, economic diplomacy has also become of greater importance for South Africa. And this is accentuated by the trade policies that are coming out of Washington. And South Africa will be looking to ensure that the more than 150 Norwegian companies that are invested in South Africa continue to deliver value. Now, given South Africa's efforts to reform its state-owned enterprises and President Ramaphosa's announcement of government's intention to create a sovereign wealth fund, it will also be important that this exchange continues to share experiences in terms of Norway setting up the world's largest sovereign wealth fund and using its natural resources to fund its development going forward. Norwegian investments in South Africa remain significant, particularly in the renewable energy sector. For instance, Fund, the Norwegian Investment Fund for Developing Countries, has actively been involved in various projects, partnering with the UK's CDC group to invest 600 million in Age One Capital, a South African Black-owned and managed renewable investment and development company. Fund also announced an $8 million, about 120 million rand investment in South African raisin processor and distributor Red Sun. This was established in 2009, and Red Sun is based in the Northern Cape, a region where approximately 90% of South Africa's raisins are produced. Lastly, colleagues, as an active development partner in Africa and the Global South, South Africa has actively contributed to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations through its African Renaissance Fund, and will thus add value to enhance cooperation between the likes of your African Renaissance Fund and the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, including through identifying opportunities in triangular cooperation in Southern Africa and beyond. So there's a lot that South Africa and Norway can continue to work together and share experiences as South Africa looks to commit to energy security and energy mix, but also to green industrialization. And certainly, Norway will also be, I think, happily involved in that engagement between the two countries, but also in supporting South Africa's G20 presidency. So, Chris, I end there. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Polani, for those words of wisdom and encouragement. It's really, to see this long history, the relationship between Norway and South Africa, which extends also deeply into the electricity sector, the development of the South African electricity wholesale market, and the preparation of the grid code. There's significant experience we can take from Norway in its market development. And you've pointed out how this can extend into the electric vehicle industry, and the experiences that Norway has had there. And that's not to say that we can just copy and paste, but we can learn and see what works in Norway and how this could work in South Africa if it is adapted for our own needs. So really grateful to have your words there, Pilani. And we're now going to move on to our second speaker, who I would like to introduce to you now. Salim Fakir is the Executive Director of the African Climate Foundation. And Salim is a thought leader at the intersection of climate and development. And he's a founder of the ACF, the African Climate Foundation. He chairs the Atlantic Special Economic Zone in South Africa, championing the advancement of a green industrial hub dedicated to clean technology with a commitment to sustainable development. Salim is a prolific author and speaker, and he brings a multidisciplinary experience to his work with his background in biotechnology, biodiversity, and conservation. I got to know him at the worldwide WWF, the World Wildlife Foundation, many years ago. And I know him today as the head of the African Climate Foundation. So he's expanded his focus to energy, economics, and climate change. And he's got a keen interest in philosophy, political economy, political science, and behavioral economics. And he also serves as an adjunct senior lecturer at the University of Cape Town. So a big welcome to you today, Salim. Good to see you there. And over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Chris. I haven't seen you for a long time. Also to congratulate you for pulling this together. I think given the numbers of people and knowing you for so long, most people come to your webinars because of you, Chris, and the amazing work you do. not necessarily for the speakers. I see you have like over 350 people there, which is amazing. I couldn't even get those kind of people to come. Just to share a few insights, because firstly, I want to congratulate Norway for the level of EV penetration it has succeeded in doing, given that it's an oil and gas producing country as well. So there's a lot of lessons there for a number of jurisdictions that are one, oil and gas producers, but on the other, also jurisdictions that are highly dependent on imports of oil. And we will come back to that in a moment. But as you noted, 5 years ago, I had already engaged you on the African Climate Foundation, and has now operates in about 10 countries across the continent, and we also provide investment grants in about 30 countries at the moment. And some of the countries we work in are not only just South Africa, where we are very heavily involved with the Just Energy Transition Partnership, but also work we do in Senegal, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and many of the other countries like Kenya as well. We are in the last year or two, we are working with other philanthropic foundations globally, particularly with Climate Works Foundation, which has a global program on Drive Electric campaign, which is really to promote the adoption of EVs around the world. And it is not only looking at developed economies or advanced economies, but also a strong South-South dimension to this. And so we are a very important partner as part of this global Drive Electric campaign. But I think as far as ACF goes, given our reorientation of our strategy in the last 2 years, we want to go beyond campaigns. We actually want to facilitate the establishment of scaling up of clean energy solutions, including electric vehicles, through the facilitation via our grant investments of the creation of investment platforms. And what do I mean by that is that we want to align a government ambition in the transport sector or e-mobility sector with plausible and credible investment opportunities, and then being able to bring in the capital that is needed to scale up these solutions once there's a clear set of standards, policy frameworks, and other things being put in place. And I think Norway has an important role to play, because I've been engaging with the Norwegian embassy here on the Africa strategy as well. And it's very encouraging that Norway is looking to expand or at least deepen its interest on the continent. And hopefully, given that it's also has one of the largest pension funds in the world, and investment through law fund, that will look, we would be encourage them to look very closely at opportunities in Africa on new electric vehicles. Given that I just mentioned to you that we are involved with the JETP, one of the areas in the JETP, of course, is the expansion and the rollout and investments in electric vehicles. We are making slow progress. We have not made sufficient progress. But our foundation is beginning to see upsurge of interest in other jurisdictions like Kenya, Ethiopia, Senegal. I visited Senegal 2 months ago. I went to go and see the equivalent of ESCOM, which is Senelec, and Senelec wants to look at driving at least phase one program that they are trying to put in place is the expansion of electric vehicles. And I have a team at the present in Ethiopia looking at opportunities in Ethiopia, given that they have also put a ban on the importation of ICE vehicles, and are looking seriously at electric vehicles, given that they have also a clean source of energy, mostly hydro, through the Grand Renaissance Dam. are also looking to, and also sit with surplus power, also looking to utilize that in electric vehicles and to reduce their dependency on oil importations. Now, EVs are an important part of the transition, decarbonization process and transition process in South Africa. It is going to be reflected possibly in the new NDC goals, but there are a couple of factors that are important for South Africa that is driving the imperatives for electric vehicles, not just the transformation of the transport sector. We're already tackling decarbonization in electricity. We are definitely looking at it in steel and the petrochemicals industry. They're all interconnected. And we are also looking to drive this e-mobility solutions as far as we can in the transport sector. More importantly, our automotive sector has to also respond to changes in the global market and demands. Our major export destinations are Europe and, of course, US and other jurisdictions. But the automotive sector is under pressure to also look at getting more and more involved in the production and manufacturing of electric vehicles. We are staring in the face carbon border tax adjustments that are coming through from a number of countries with which we trade, in particular the EU as a bloc. UK is also putting some of these on the cards. It's uncertain about the US, given the situation there, but we will see. Importantly, other factors for us to get the scale up of electric vehicles is that we have to stay ahead of the curve in the technology space, and particularly in the automotive sector, we should not lose sight of the other parts of the value chain that are important to the production of EVs, which includes battery storage, etc. Besides that, other factor is that they're also nice cars to drive. I visited the Chinese automotive testing center in April, and even though we weren't allowed to take our cell phones in and so on, I was able to observe that there are a variety of electric vehicles that market has not been seen that are going to come on board. And I was completely surprised at the scale of which China is adopting these technologies and the variety of models that they are going to produce in the coming future. And it's likely, and it's possibly certain that companies like BYD, etc., are going to dominate the electric vehicle market and possibly displace Tesla. So if you have Tesla shares, you should think about whether you want to continue to invest in that, not just in terms of market competition, but for other reasons that you probably will see in reading the newspaper. In trying to round off my discussion, let me just share some challenges that we have in South Africa. And I think, Chris, here we have to play a bigger policy role through the Presidential Climate Commission, and the Transport Ministry is looking at creating clear policy signals through our NDC goals and ambition, and being able to then translate that into other policy mechanisms. The second is that we have high grid carbon intensity, which we have to find ways in reducing in the future. There's definitely a slow uptake. The figure I have here is less than 1,500 EVs sold in 2024, which is, in my view, not acceptable, and we have to do something about it. We have to consider EVs, and it's more important for South Africa, the interlink between adoption of EVs for personal or public use with the creation of beneficiation in other parts of the value chain, including manufacturing, etc. The barriers to EV adoption remains the cost of EVs, and that is something we need to talk about. As you know, or as many of you know, there's also the South African Renewable Energy or Manufacturing Plan that could also potentially be looked at in terms of storage technologies or battery technologies. I have, interestingly, a research colleague of mine has uh, noted that fossil fuel subsidies at the moment, and I have to verify the figure, is in the range of $2.3 billion per year. This is according to National Treasury statistics. And that's also another reason for us to look at this. And ACF is also presently supporting the Department of Transport through the CSR to revise our green transport strategy so that it's aligned with the JETP investment plan as well as the Climate Act. Chris, I think I would like to conclude there. I think I've gone over my 10 minutes and you did not stop me yet. But just to say, I think this is a very pertinent issue, but the challenge here is both an opportunity, but also to fix some of the stumbling blocks that we are dealing with, and we are happy to work with parties in trying to solve that. And I'm eager to hear from our Norwegian colleagues and others a little bit more about Norway. We have a lot to learn from them. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Salim, for those words. And no, I would not cut you off. I can assure you the words you have are too important to cut at any stage. So I think you've given us a whole lot of insights that I know we're going to explore further in this webinar. Really interesting for me is, the CBAM barriers to trade with the EU, or put it this way, making it our products less competitive because the internal combustion engine cars that we currently export to the European Union are going to face barriers, I guess. But it also applies to the US market, where they are not looking at a CBAM as a barrier, but are introducing tariffs 30% on South African vehicles. That is a massive barrier. So the whole world, our trading relationship with the world is going to be changing. And we're going to have to find new markets for our vehicles, and we're going to have to ensure that our vehicles meet the customers' needs and the regulatory requirements of the countries that we trade with. And I see opportunities here for electric vehicles and huge threats if we don't adapt to these changes. And you've highlighted a lot of these issues in your presentation, Salim, so thank you very much indeed for that. And we're now going to move on to our first major presentation, as opposed to the opening keynotes by Kulani and Salim. The first presentation, per se, is going to be by Hiten Palmer, who is the Executive Director of the Electric Mission, a well-known evangelist, I would call him, in the electric vehicle ecosystem. A long history in this field, and it continues to this day through the Electric Mission. And you can see what this is about. It's about a mission to drive electric vehicles and electrification of South African sectors of the economy. So Hiten is a seasoned expert and distinguished thought leader with over 21 years of professional experience. He plays a pivotal role as a key liaison for various sector reform forums. He operates, in South African environment locally, but also regionally and internationally, in championing the advancement of the electric mobility ecosystem. Hiten is mission-driven on sustainable technology progression within the global industry. And in this vision, he fulfills this daily as the Executive Director of the Electric Mission in South Africa, which we're going to hear a little bit more about today, I hope, as well as his thoughts on the EV ecosystem and environment, both business and technical, and the local manufacturing sector. So with that, over to you, Hiten. We're looking forward to hearing your presentation. Please share your presentation. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and to the fellow panelists and all attendees joining. Looking forward to sharing these insights on this topic, which, as alluded to, is very topical in South Africa across many pillars. With that, I'll be doing some perspectives of the South African story and where we stand, and then moving into that itself. And I'll be joined from my fellow colleagues, so I know we will share those insights from the Norwegian experience. So to kick off, I think some of the perspectives that we look at from a South Africa perspective is just to provide scene setting on electric vehicle adoption in South Africa. This image here is a road trip that was done just ahead of the Centenary Conference in Cape Town, where we traveled with 5 battery electric vehicles across South Africa, 5 provinces, and covering 2,225 kilometers, showing that EVs are ready from a vehicle perspective, as well as our charging infrastructure. And I think just also gives merit and context to where we are in South Africa with the geographic regions that we have, and landscape and technologies that we have into that. So as we get into that, some perspectives for the electric mission, for that do not know it. It is a registered not-profit organization in South Africa, and we work through key partners and stakeholders on empowering the mobility and energy transition. We see a future that is climate resilient, sustainable, and equitable, and we are supported by a key leadership experience of 80 plus years. Taking lessons from international as well, we've also been quite active on formalizing this sector of the e-mobility within the South African Electric Mobility Association that is in development and what will be rolled out in short time. So this is what we also engage with all players, including the Norwegian EV Association, the Global Electric Vehicle Alliance, and other key entities that are driving the initiatives forward. So if we get into it, South Africa's first battery electric vehicle was introduced in 2013, well over 10 years ago, and this has just been a very slow progression. However, if you look at recent years from 2022 onwards, we've crossed the 1,000 milestone in every year. And just in the first half of 2025, we've already reached the 4,000 mark in terms of that, which is already showing an exponential increase in these numbers in South Africa. This is pure battery electric vehicles, and that is a fully battery operated vehicle itself with no hybrid technology on there or alternative propulsion. Now, if you look at this is still not where we need to be. We are still less than 1% of our total fleet of approximately 13 million vehicles on our roads. So there's still work required in terms of that. But we do acknowledge the models from various manufacturers that have been introduced into our country and into our market within difficult conditions of tariffs and existing structures in place. Now, if we do some benchmarking, specifically to regions that have an automotive industry and somewhat competitive into South Africa's value proposition, we see that South Africa is certainly lagging behind. This is where we need to have policy reform and really structuring South Africa's demand side and supply side regulations for the markets as well. Now, if you look at other emerging economies, certainly accelerating very quickly, and South Africa is being left behind in terms of that. And a part of our work is sensitization to all actors within government and industry to really advance the sector and take South Africa forward in what it holds historically from an automotive industry, and taking it forward to the ambitions of our automotive master plan of 2035, where we aim to be at 1% of global production. Now, if you look at South Africa's automotive industry, it's not a short-term industry that has been established. This started in 1924 in the then Port Elizabeth with the Ford Model T. So as alluded to earlier, South Africa celebrated 100 years of automotive manufacturing, and we have a very strong value chain within that, not only within primary vehicle production, but also the component industry that is a huge job creator and significant investor from multinationals that are active in the country. So over the years, South Africa has primarily had an internal combustion engine value chain. We've had progression slowly in terms of switching to hybrid production. That started with Mercedes-Benz in 2018 within the plug-in hybrid C-Class. That then moved to Toyota with the Corolla Cross Hybrid in 2021. BMW South Africa with the plug-in hybrid there, and recently with the Ford Ranger plug-in hybrid that has been established in Silverton in Pretoria. Now, if we look at that, this is still a challenge to see where we export our vehicles, because Europe have announced specific timelines in terms of bans of these vehicles we produce, and similarly UK. So South Africa's export market of vehicles is primarily driven to these two regions that absorb all of our vehicles that we produce. And by these bans, we then won't be able to export our vehicles, of which 75% of our vehicles are exported, 60% to these two regions alone. So what this means is that South Africa radically needs to change its manufacturing base towards electric vehicles, towards which the global auto industry is manufacturing and global policies are speaking to. An interesting perspective that came out of NAACAM, which is the Automotive Component Association in South Africa, provided a reference to say that our automotive manufacturing value chain and production line are agnostic to the technology. We see this whole development of this value chain of how vehicles are manufactured very agnostic to either a battery electric, hybrid, or internal combustion engine. And this eventually at the end would then move to the specific technology. So we have a strong readiness of our automotive industry to respond to the production incentives and signals that we have alongside government commitments. Now, if we move on to public charging infrastructure, this has also been developing over the years and also across multiple actors. So if we look at the images on the slides, we have our AC standard charge points and our DC fast charging points across the country. I think one of the challenges that we see in South Africa is that we have a wide geographic footprint within the country, which also presents some challenges, but also opportunities of developing this. However, there have been multiple actors over the years that have invested into the charging infrastructure network, and continuous multiple players also entering the market to expand the diversity of service providers within that. And it's also important to note that with electric vehicles, you've also got portable EV charging. So any wall socket that's available is an opportunity to charge these vehicles. It's generally known that 80 to 90% of charging of an EV actually takes place at home. So this is the reference on that. Now, if we look at the slide to the right, this was published within the International Energy Agency Global EV Outlook, where it profiles South Africa is within the top 20 for public charging infrastructure to the available vehicles in the roads. So that's a positive footprint for where we stand against the vehicles in the country. But where we are right now, we'll begin to see expanded infrastructure across the country as multiple operators move into this space and expand it. So certainly we see this, especially from a highway network. We've got a very strong presence and actors coming into that. Just moving forward, I think we acknowledge that South Africa has its challenges from an energy capacity. We've had rolling blackouts since 2007, but over recent years and months, this is somewhat stabilized. But on that note, it's also important to note that this crisis has catapulted the solar and battery energy storage industry. The latest stats from SAPIA Association references 10 gigawatts of private solar installed capacity in that, which is an ideal benefit for EV charging. This is sustainable, but also from a cost perspective, a cheaper alternative. We also see, as you see it below, multiple sites across the country that are solar and battery backed up, including some that are totally off-grid and even having larger capacity, such as 400 kilowatt charging. So this is a clear opportunity where we look at sector coupling between mobility and energy as we look at the energy transition itself. Speaking of energy transition, there's a key debate that always comes up from a perspective of where we are today and where we need to go to. There was an interesting report that was done some few years ago with some consultations that took place. Now, if we look at South Africa's fuel quality right now, we are still at Euro 2, where mature markets are at Euro 5 and Euro 6. So part of this analysis looked at if we transition from Euro 2 to Euro 6, there will only be a 12% saving on greenhouse gas emissions. If we charge our electric vehicle fleet to the current grid mix, this will provide a 34% saving. However, if we charge to the renewables, this will provide a 67% saving on greenhouse gas emissions. So that contextualizes where we are in terms of our current grid capacity and charging from that. Also alluding to the earlier point reference that we have a lot of rooftop solar already available that can be utilized for charging either from residential, commercial, or industrial sites as well. So one of the challenges in South Africa is really on the price affordability, in electric vehicles, if we look at other regions. Part of our deep dive has also looked at where does this stand and what are the contributing factors into the price of electric vehicles in South Africa. There's been multiple surveys done and consumers want EVs, but it's a challenge of affordability. One of the challenges is the current import tariffs that are imposed, where electric vehicles attract 25% import duty when imported from the EU under the free trade agreement, where internal combustion vehicles, including hybrids and plug-in hybrids, attract 18% customs excise duty. This is a compounding effect towards the eventual retail price that consumers pay. So this is one of the points that needs addressing. It's also one matter that has been raised within the Clean Trade Investment Partnership that was recently signed between South Africa and the EU, and this will be a topic of discussion and also execution to reform these so that no technology is disadvantaged in this case. But this is one of the barriers that we've noted within that. Now, if we look at South Africa's policy instruments, we acknowledge that we have a somewhat structure in the country. However, there is some barriers in terms of where this stands. So we acknowledge the CO2 levy, which is there to really shift the polluter pay principle. We've got a fuel levy, fuel economy and CO2 labeling, and carbon tax. So these are measures that are there, although weak in terms of as we look at the energy transition. And this remains a work in progress that we need to address in South Africa. Now, if we look at South Africa, where we stand today, we certainly are committed to our global commitments to the Paris Agreement and others, but also relative to what we've introduced as our local just energy transition. We also acknowledge that South Africa, amongst other countries, also have high vehicle purchase taxes on our new vehicles sold in the country. We have some environmental component within our taxes, although very weak, and this is part of the work that we've done with the Norwegian EV Association in highlighting this. But also, we also acknowledge that there is an impact in terms of business as usual from our environment, but we need to transform this within our local economies and local economic situation as well. And lastly, just as we highlight some of the relations between Norway and South Africa, we were highlighted that Norway has also recently joined South Africa's Just Energy Transition portfolio, where new energy vehicles also included within this portfolio. And we look forward to also working closely with Norway and the International Partner Group in supporting our Just Energy Transition, but also, more critically, is on new energy vehicle transition. As I conclude, part of our work was also highlighting some of the deep dives and relations between Norway and South Africa. What was interesting, in 2018, South African government launched the National Green Transport Strategy in 2018, which takes our decarbonization strategy to 2050. Strategic Pillar 8 seeks to promote hybrid electric vehicles, although a reference of 5% greenhouse gas reduction by 2050, which is somewhat a shortfall in terms of ambitions. Similarly, Norwegian Parliament agreed at the National Transport Plan on a specific target that was time-bound and ambitious-bound, that where all new passenger vehicle sales and light vans will be zero-emission vehicles by 2025. This was not an outright ban, but an intent and ambition from government that stimulated the market. And now we'll move over to hear more on that from my colleague Sweinung. Sweinung, over to you. Chris, I think you will introduce Sweinung before he shares his slides. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heaton, for this really interesting presentation. You've, I think, explained the South African context extremely clearly. The role of policy and tariffs and the barriers, as well as the advantages that we have. And I was really interested to hear about your comment that there's a strong readiness to respond to this change, because a lot of the component manufacturer is technology agnostic. And that puts us in a good position to respond to this change and to secure our markets going forward instead of losing them. So, for me, that was a positive picture that you painted. But it's now, time to hear more about the Norwegian experience. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Sveinung Gvalo, who is the senior advisor of the Norwegian Electric Vehicle Association. And he is being assisted in the background, and she will also help me in the Q&A by Uni Berger, who is the head of communication at the Norwegian EV Association. And may I, before I introduce you as Sveinung, if I may just encourage all of our attendees to post your questions on the Zoom text Q&A facility. Our presenters are standing by to answer your questions, both in text form, as well as during the Q&A session that we're going to still hold. And we're also going to ask, questions verbally by people can put up their hands and ask verbal questions. But please do send your text questions as the presentations proceed, and we will be answering them in text form as the presentations proceed as well. So let me get on with introducing Sveinung. Sveinung has over 25 years experience with economic analyses on transport and energy. He's been an energy analyst in the energy sector itself, in both the private and public sectors. He has worked with national climate policies and international climate negotiations, and is one of the leading electric vehicle policy experts in Norway. He has extensive knowledge on environmental transport and sustainable urban development. It's wonderful to have you here and to have this technology that allows us to bring experts from all around the world to talk to our South African audience about their experiences and sharing these experiences and learnings. And I think we've got a lot to learn from Norway and from Sveinung himself. So with that, over to you, Sveinung, if you can please share your presentation, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for hosting this webinar. I'll just share my presentation. So I had the pleasure to be in South Africa 2 times. First in 2011 at the COP in Durban, but also we were invited by Heaton and Electric Mission and had the pleasure of driving an electric vehicle across South Africa from Port Elizabeth to Cape Town. 1,000 kilometers with the electric vehicle. That was really, really fun and a pleasure, and also encouraging to see that you also have the basic infrastructure started with that. So it was possible to charge the car during our trip. First, I just want to say that I'm working, me and Uni, we work in the Norwegian EV Association. We are a member association with over 120,000 paying members. We are 55 employees who are working full-time on electrification, and our goal is to electrify transport as fast as possible to the benefit of our climate and environment. And also this, we're very proud of course, that so far this year, 94% of all cars are battery electric vehicles. And note that we don't count plug-in hybrids as electric vehicles, so they're part of the internal combustion engine figure of 6% so far this year. Also, we are now just above 900,000 EVs in Norway, and we expect to be over 1 million early next year. When we look at the fast charging infrastructure, it's actually keeping up with the electric development of sales of electric cars. And I wanted to just look at this figure because after 2017, there has been a fully functional commercial market of fast chargers. So this is a market that has developed in itself almost without any government support after 2017. We did some support in the years 2012 to 2017, But that was to encourage, to give subsidies to private companies who wanted to build the initial charging infrastructure. But this is a scalable network, so it can be adapted to the number of cars as long as you get this minimum requirement that you need to get people to buy electric vehicles. Here you see the number of EVs per fast charger. It has actually been declining after the years with subsidies. So there are now there are more chargers per car than it was back in the early days. Also, just want you to be aware that 80% of all charging is being done at home. People usually also quite quickly invest in a charging box at home because of security issues and to reduce, to eliminate the risk of fire. And also wanted to show you how this affects our electricity market. So we are producing around 157 terawatt hours of electricity in 2024. And the consumption is 139 terawatt hours, of which 1.6 terawatt hours was used for electric transport, that is charging passenger cars. So most of the electricity in Norway is being used for industry and heating. And an average EV approximately uses the same amount of electricity as the average water heater in a household. So, but what happens if all the cars are replaced and also heavy duty? That's what you see on the right. On the right side there, then if all passenger cars would be electric, they would use 6 to 7 terawatt hours, and it would be about the same amount for heavy duty. But in such a situation, and we expect to be there in some years, around 2040, we would still be in a situation where most of electricity is going to other things, but also we would still be a electricity exporting country with the production and consumption we have today. And I think also it's really interesting to look into smart charging opportunities. There's a lot of stress on the grid for electricity use, but this is a situation we have been used to for a long time. And the government and the grid companies were really concerned about electric vehicles when the sales started to take off around 10 years ago. But it turns out that people usually charge at night. And now the grid companies are saying that the electric cars are not anymore. They don't see it anymore as a threat to the grid. Actually, they can help the grid if you use electricity in a smart manner. But also, there's a lot of opportunities in vehicle to grid where actually the cars can help the grid perform better than it does today. And this technology is already well on its way. And it's interesting to see a lot of interest in this also for Norwegian users. But still, this is not a technology that is taken for most people. We almost see no examples of vehicle to grid in practice. It's still mostly on a research phase, also in Norway. The third thing I want to mention is that your electric car can actually be an electricity backup, because we also have blackouts in Norway, but it's typically after bad weather. with storms and lightnings. We saw last year that there was a community that with around 1,000 households that lost their power for 1 to 2 weeks. And the people who had a car with a vehicle to load a capability like the Hyundais and the Konas, they could actually provide their home with electricity. So their coffee machine worked, their Wi-Fi worked, and television and lights. So they could operate their house. They had to change the source of heating, but unlike their neighbors, they were able to keep up all the vital functions that you need for television and internet services, and of course also the coffee machine. So they could provide this to their homes for like 3 to 4 days, and then they could just go to the nearest fast charger that worked and go back to their house and serve their house for another 3 to 4 days. Also, now we're seeing the impact on the emissions, because it takes a long time from you start to buy electric vehicles until you get a really impact on your emissions. But we are seeing this clearly now from year to year, that the passenger cars, emissions from passenger cars is steeply declining, and mostly because of electric vehicles. So now we have had a 30% decrease since 1990 in emissions from passenger cars. And this is mainly due to electric vehicles now. Also, when we ask our drivers, we have a yearly member survey. We see that people are really happy with their electric vehicles. 92% are satisfied or very satisfied with driving an EV, and almost no one wants to go back to ICE vehicles. But as I mentioned, there's a long road to go. Even if we are now close to 100% in new sales, it takes time to change the whole fleet. So by now, almost 30% of all passenger cars in Norway are battery electric, but there are still 2 million ICE vehicles that we need to replace. Also, when you look at the other types of vehicles, haven't come that far. 8% for vans, 14% for buses, and 3% for trucks. I also want to mention that in the history of Norwegian EV policies, we had 2 really serious efforts to establish car production in Norway. Of course, we're envious on South Africa, who have their own car industry. We really wanted to have that in Norway as well. And in the early 90s, we saw electric vehicles as an opportunity to establish manufacturing in Norway. So what you see here is the brands called Think, and on the left, and Buddy on the right. On the left is actually our crown prince, who will be our next king. He has been an EV supporter since the early days. And if you look at his number on his plate, he was number 256 to get an EV in Norway. And today it's over 900,000 EV owners. On the right side, you see our Secretary General, and also the head of program Fully Charged, showing the Buddy vehicle, which also was a Norwegian adventure. So sadly, they both went bankrupt, but I think it's important to keep in mind that part of the reason why we have such strong policies is because we wanted to support production of electric vehicles in Norway. So as Heaton mentioned, we had a parliament decision in 27, which I think was very bold, and where Norwegian politicians decided that they wanted to keep on being a global leader of electric vehicles. where they decided in Parliament that all new passenger cars and light vans sold in 2025 shall be zero-emission vehicles. And of course, this is not a ban, but it's about policies and to encourage people to buy electric vehicles. And for that, you need a strong policy package. So you can say it's three parts in this package. One thing is the supply side policies, which is a requirement for manufacturers. And these are EU-wide emission standards that Norway is a part of. On the second element is the demand side policies. It's both purchase incentives when you buy the car. It's also user incentives when you have bought the car. And the third element is infrastructure and investment. You need a fast charging network. You need home and street charging, and you also have public procurement possibilities where the state and the municipalities can decide to buy zero-emission vehicles. But as I mentioned, this is financially is quite a small part, and we have managed to have a thriving charging industry in Norway, along with the development of sales. I want to go, and now we have looked, in this project, we have looked specifically at the purchase incentives. So I want to go more into detail on these purchase incentives, which is the most important part of the policy picture in Norway. So we have, of course, strong purchase incentives. The one thing we have is that electric vehicles, they don't pay VAT, and this is up to the value of a car that of $44,000 US. If you buy a car that is more expensive, you pay a full VAT of 25% on the excess amount above $44,000 US. But the other thing is that electric vehicles, they have no or low registration tax. And I think this is a really important to explain. Because what we do is, it's twofold, and it's following the polluter pays principle. So one part of the policy of the purchase policy is that polluting cars, they pay a high tax, which is also dependent on the level of emission from the car. So cars who have low emissions, typically hybrids and plug-in hybrids, have lower taxes than cars with no emissions, with high emissions, typically the classic conventional ICE vehicle. And this is actually a source of revenue for the government. So it doesn't cost the government a lot of money. It's actually generating a lot of revenues. And this you can use to give tax exemption for EVs. So if you want to, you're able to, you could balance this so that you could always make sure that you get the revenues you need, and still encourage people to buy electric vehicles instead of ICE vehicles. So we call this a bonus-malus system, where you tax what you don't want and you give support to what you want, which is electric vehicles. So just to explain how this actually works, if you see the blue color, that's the price of the car. As we know, electric vehicles, they are more costly to produce than a typical ICE vehicle. So that means that the price difference is already negative for the electric vehicle. If you add 20% VAT on petrol and diesel cars, and don't do it on electric, that's a way of leveling playing field. And also, in addition, if you put on a registration tax, which is based on the emissions of the car, you're able to actually total leveling of the playing field between petrol car and electric car. And that's what you see in Norway. If you go to a store to buy a car, you would see that the price of a petrol or diesel vehicle is almost similar to that similar type of electric vehicle. Also, you can see in this picture that we have started to pay a small registration tax also for electric vehicles, which is not based on CO2 but on weight. And also, I mentioned if the values of the car is above $45,000 US, you also pay VAT of the excess amount. So, and we know from our survey that the main reason why people are buying electric vehicles is because of the economy and the low costs. So when we ask our members, that's the reason why they are choosing electric cars. So, and a lot of people care about the environment, but you need also the cost to be comparable for people to actually choose the most environmental beneficial car. Yeah, so now I want to hand it back to Heaton again.
Great. Yeah, we've heard some perspectives of the Norwegian experience, and now we'll just consolidate on what were some of the learned lessons between the bilateral project that we had with the Norwegian EV Association over the past 2 years, which was supported by the Climate Works Foundation. So we went into a deep dive of vehicle benchmarking between what vehicles were available in South Africa and what vehicles were available in Norway. I think on the onset, one of the things that we realized in South Africa that it was actually difficult to find equivalent vehicles available in Norway because a lot of the manufacturers were already transitioning into only supplying electric vehicles, because from a policy perspective, this was the market signal. So it was a bit of a joke, but it was a tough exercise to find these vehicles that were available in South Africa and compare these to available vehicles in Norway as well. But what we did is we took the various vehicle segments in comparison from a sedan to a SUV in both electric and combustion platforms, and we were able to compare these. Now, if you look at the first vehicle on the top left, you can see that perspective of what a petrol vehicle is charged from a price point of view and taxation in Norway in comparison to South Africa. And you can see with the specific policies that are implemented in Norway, this is working, where these technologies are higher in terms of supporting government's transition and ambition to transition away from fossil fuels to new energy vehicles in that. From a diesel perspective, you can even see this is higher, because diesel vehicles have an associated impact from a pollution perspective in particulate matter and other technologies that are imposed, and with this associated tax on that as well. And similarly as well, you can see that in South Africa as well, where that currently stands on that. But if you move to the electric vehicles, and this is battery electric vehicles, you can see an opposite effect, where South Africa has higher taxes in that compared to the available vehicles and the support mechanisms in Norway. And this is really showing a clear reflection of how these policy instruments between the two countries really affect the pricing and affordability of vehicles to support policy and ambitions of a country. But this is what needs to work hand in hand. If we have an intent from a policy to get to a destination, we need to have supporting instruments that really reflect on this and show how this affects, because this is what makes the difference for consumers and buyers when we look at this technology. And this was assessed in the comparison of what is the price point in South Africa, where we've got the customs duty. We then have the ad valorem, which is a luxury tax based on the base price of a vehicle. So if a vehicle is higher priced in terms of luxury and other features, it will attract higher taxes. And that's across all aspects, not only vehicles, but also that it increased the compounding effect of that as well. And in Norway, this is compared to a weight tax. Then we have environmental tax, which is a CO2 levy that is in existence in South Africa and Norway, but our effect of that is much lower in South Africa as well. And this remains work in progress that we need to review in our transition towards environment-friendly vehicles, and obviously VAT on top of that. So this is what we've analyzed and what we've also compared in terms of that. Now, if we look at what we want to do as we do, deep dive into this, it's really to capitalize on the transition to electric vehicles in South Africa. But this has to be achieved from stimulating local demand and really create a market, even if it's based on imports initially, but importantly, transition to local manufacturing, because this is the key component for South Africa. It's not only about driving imports, it's about really transforming our legacy automotive industry towards the future that the global economy and auto industry is demanding from that. We also need to acknowledge that we have immense emissions from our existing transport fleet, with road transport contributing to 91.2% of our road transport emissions. So we have the opportunity to decarbonize our transport and speak to our climate goals and transport ambitions within that. We also need to review the level of revenue for government, because acknowledging South African government doesn't have the opportunity to create rebates like other regions have done, but more importantly, use the mechanisms and instruments that are currently available to tweak over the years to get where we need to do. But also, it's acknowledging that we can only have a shift in our South African market if we try and bring the general price point a lot closer for all vehicle segments and technologies. So this is what the ambition of the project and the work that we did. So as we dived deeper into this, we then looked at some benchmarking between fossil fuel vehicles and battery electric vehicles. And if we just worked on one vehicle itself, this is in a South Africa perspective, we did some benchmarking and this is what we came to. So if we take this forward and we say what could be the possibilities in using the existing instruments that National Treasury and the Ministry of Finance has and can tweak, we can get to a typical scenario that we bring this a lot closer for battery electric vehicles with what we have. We don't need a new bill. We don't need a new declaration. We can use and tweak our existing instruments to really get where we need to be, really stimulating local demand and getting a market accelerating to supporting a value chain of investments to support local manufacturing. So this is what we really unpacked with the Norwegian team across the expertise of all the work that they've done and presenting this to what South Africa can use to transition. So in key takeaways that we do have instruments that can be used and tweaked to get where we need to do and achieve the ambitions that we do within existing instruments at play, but we really need the political will and ambition to support this. And I think what is key as a key takeaway in the insights that we've received is that the policy package is key. It's not only just one instrument. We really need to look at it from a supply perspective, a demand side, and infrastructure as well. What remains key is stimulating local demand. I think the reflections have been that while we had our first battery electric in 2013, we're still less than 1% of our national fleet. And this is where we need to change this, to really drive a local demand of appetite for EVs. Consumers want EVs, but we have to address the current barriers. And inevitably, what remains primarily important, we need to transform our automotive industry. And this remains a key priority for South Africa. We have a good taxation structure, although we need to tweak these in supporting the energy transition amongst national ambitions of where we need to go to. So thank you for your attention, and I hope these insights have been giving you some perspectives of where we stand. It's certainly not gloom and doom for South Africa. We can work together and co-create the future that we want to get to. Thank you, Chris, and over back to you.
Yeah, that's really very interesting indeed. One of my takeaways, and it's also your takeaway that you've just explained, is the need to align our non-negotiable principles, that we may have as a country. These are things such as job creation, such as decarbonization, to align with our commitments, international commitments. We've got to decide what are our non-negotiable principles. And then we've got to make sure that our policy positions are aligned with these principles. It's no good having a non-negotiable principle and then having a policy position which is not aligned with this. And then, as you pointed out too, there also has to be an alignment of the policy instruments that give effect to our policy positions. And you've talked about, purchase tax, ad valorem tax, VAT, etc. And how, and what also interested me was Sveinung's messaging that by adjusting the taxes, purchase taxes and VAT, etc., between electric vehicles and internal combustion vehicles, one can do it in a way that ultimately the revenue collection by government is the same. But you have implemented your non-negotiable principles and policy positions without having lost revenue. And that should be the goal. And Norway has taught us that it works. And Hiten, you have also indicated from your studies in South Africa how we could really align the pricing structure between internal combustion engine vehicles and electric vehicles in a way that really does stimulate demand, which is critical. And stimulating demand is going to stimulate local manufacture, and it's going to stimulate jobs, and it's going to reduce carbon emissions. For me, there's this alignment now of our non-negotiable principles with our policy positions and with the tools that we use to affect our policy positions. And that's the kind of takeaway that I got from Sveinung and from yourself. Of course, a whole lot of other issues were raised by both yourself and Sveinung. And we look forward now to discussing this in the Q&A session. But can I just remind the presenters and panelists, please, can you switch on your cameras and your microphones? And also, if you can help me by answering as many of the text questions as you can in the text Q&A facility. And we'll try and handle also some of the questions that remain unanswered. And also, as I say, with people who want to raise their hand, we can then take some oral questions as well. But before I do so, I'd like to just introduce you again, as I did a little earlier, to Uni Berger, who is going to help me facilitate this Q&A session. She has got much more experience than I do, both in the electric vehicle market generally, but in particular the Norwegian side of things. So Uni, as I mentioned before, is the head of communication and PR in the Norwegian Electric Vehicle Association, and Sveinung has given us details about the association itself. Previously, she has worked for the Norwegian government as well as in the Norwegian Parliament. So great pleasure to having you here, Uni, as well, and our presenters who are here with us. I'm just wondering why I don't see Hiten's face in the lineup of the panel, but I hope you still... Oh, yes, I do see you there, Hiten. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, so we're all here and ready to take your questions. And Uni, you have listened in to these presentations, and you've got a lot of experience in the Norwegian environment. And maybe you can pick up some of the themes that have been asked in the questions and pose one of your themes, in your own words, to any one of our presenters on the panel today. But it'd be great to have you kicking off this Q&A session by posing a question that you've spotted, on the Q&A session, or you've got in your head after listening to the presentation that you would like to ask one of the presenters. Can I hand over to you if you can switch your microphone on and pose a question to our panel? Thank you.
Well, I just have read a lot about different questions coming up in the written question and answers. And a lot of now one question is about if we have had big information campaigns in Norway to persuade people to buy EVs. And I can say that it has not been governmentally funded information campaigns in Norway. Actually, I think it's fair to say that it is the economical benefits of buying an EV compared with an ICE card that has persuaded people to do so. So it's the economy. It's not like environmental feelings. And I can just use one example. That is my father. He is a car salesman, and he doesn't believe in climate change. But he's driving an EV because it's economical efficient. So I just want to start by saying that a lot of countries, people in different countries are really worried about how consumers will manage to adapt. And of course, there are difficulties. You have to learn a new technology. But as long as the economy is beneficial, we experience that people actually want to change. That's the most important thing. So, but it would be interesting to hear from South Africa how you think about that, because of course, buying a car is really expensive, and driving in a car is also you also have a lot of feelings about like your car and your brand and things like that. So it could be interesting to hear from Heaton if it was a beneficial case in buying EVs in South Africa. How do you think people would respond? Would they embrace the new technology?
Yeah, really great question. And I think, Heaton, you are ideally positioned to answer this. If the price parity was there or close, what do you think the appetite for EVs would be in South Africa? Just your perspective as an experienced person in this field. Thanks.
Yeah, no, most indeed. I think from a lot of the consumer surveys that we've seen that have analyzed the market, there is a real interest and intent to purchase EVs. I think what we also note is in the pre-owned market, in terms of the used EV market, you see this changing hands a lot, because obviously a pre-owned vehicle is a lot cheaper, and that's how people transition. In our own home, we have 2 EVs, and that's how we transitioned into EVs, because buying a new EV was just unaffordable. And we just kept an eye on the pre-owned market and eventually got 1 EV and eventually second EV, and it's literally a no-brainer. So this is what we see, is that there's an interest from consumers in South Africa to want to move to EVs. However, affordability is the main challenge. I think once we bring these, and we have also newer models available in the country, that one speaks to a price point of view, but also a brand, and we have to acknowledge that South African consumers are very linked to this legacy automotive industry, also brand loyal. And we've also seen brands switch between legacy brands to new brands. We're seeing the likes of BYD really making a massive dent in the market. But this is where it is. It's future technology. And once people embrace the technology, there's literally no turning back. And you can speak to any driver, and we've seen the stats from what was shared that most EV drivers will never return back, because it's a lifestyle change and you see the benefits. And we're at a stage now that we have real financial return on utilizing an EV. While there is an intent to reduce environmental impact, it's total economics to run an EV, either from an individual or business. So we're really at a tipping point that is starting to make sense. We just need to work with all the actors to develop our market and take us for where we need to be.
Thanks, Heaton. And if you can just stay on, Heaton, because I want to just add to the question. I mean, to what extent is our electric vehicle charging facilities holding back? In other words, if a person sees that the price is kind of right, it's sort of equivalent. To what extent is the fear of, we need a car to drive to Durban and we don't want, and there's not enough charging infrastructure. How real is this in terms of, holding the market back, the charging infrastructure? Is it holding us back?
Certainly not. As alluded to, we've got a well-developed infrastructure across the country that has been developed over multiple players over the years. The OEMs have partnered with other entities. Some entrepreneurs have spearheaded and done this investment and established this infrastructure. And also, what's importantly, as alluded to in the comments and chat, and Q&A, is that we're seeing a diversity of operators within that, because we don't want to get into a situation that our whole infrastructure is reliant on one service provider and one operator. I don't need to mention why, because we've seen that in that space. But certainly in terms of the reference you gave on the N3 between Johannesburg and Durban, we have 7 fast charging sites across that route. So, you know, it's really on our highway networks. We have a well-positioned network currently, and this is only going to grow as more players enter the market.
Thank you. And if I may now just pose a question to you as Ryan, just for my own understanding. You've explained how you can adjust the taxes to get the prices roughly at parity without losing tax revenue to the state. And that was also taken forward by Hitten. I just want to ask that in that pricing balance that you showed, is that just the capital cost, the balance in the capital cost, and does it also take into account the reduced operating costs for electric vehicles going forward? Is that an added benefit, or have you factored that into this balance? Because it'd be interesting to understand the cost, the operating costs going forward, and whether you factored that into the buying decision.
Yeah, when I'm talking about the balance from a government point of view, that's about how you design these measures. But what we were really surprised by going into this project was that the taxes on electric cars are actually higher than the taxes on ICE cars. So in here you actually you start with a higher potential revenue from electric vehicles, but that's of course the main reason why people are not buying them in South Africa, because the Norwegian example shows you need to try to levelize these costs for to make people buy electric vehicles. So, but if the government, if they have a balance or not, it's dependent on how they design this, and of course it's also dependent on the volumes. Of course, when the volumes are very, very low, you could have a really, really small tax on ICE cars to balance quite a big subsidy for electric vehicles. But this is all about design. And of course, today, this is with the 94% sales of electric vehicles. Of course, this has an impact on the budget. But we started to do this very early on when the technology wasn't very mature, and you don't need the levels of subsidies today to ignite the sales of electric vehicles. So I think it would be easy for many emerging economies like in South Africa to actually still to generate a revenue at the same time as you incentivize the transition to zero emission vehicles. So I think that's what we are also thinking is a good thing for South Africa. We are definitely not saying that you should copy paste what we have done, but you also have to see this in respect that we were early movers, and I think as a rich country, I think we're obliged to go forward and do the subsidize the technology to get it going and to get it competitive. But what we see now is really, really encouraging that they are closing into soon becoming also commercially viable. And of course, you see that also in the Chinese market, where 50% of all cars today are electric vehicles in the new sales in China. So definitely a lot of potential here.
Yeah, thank you. Now I'd like to hand back to Uni, if you'd like to pose the next question to one of the panelists. If you can spread out the questions to the different panelists so they will get a chance to answer. Back to you, Uni.
Well, it would be interesting to hear from the other panelists how you think, in opposition from Norway, we don't have a car industry within our country. So, of course, in South Africa, there are considerable car production, and that might influence the interest of promoting certain technologies. That said, I think it's quite important for the traditional car industry to manage to switch over to zero emission and electrification if they're going to compete in a global market in the future. So I know some of the brands that are operating in South Africa, and some of them have started their electrification in other markets. So how do you think they would respond if South Africa would increase the incentives when it comes to promoting battery electric cars?
Salim, do you want to handle this one?
Yeah, sure. I also, if you don't mind, Chris, I have to leave in 5 minutes or so. If that's okay?
Understood.
I think this is something we are looking at in the NEV strategy for the JET-P. But my sort of summation is that there's a balancing act to be done between creating demand for the vehicles and being able to offset the loss of automotive vehicles in terms of based on fossil fuels and to be able to transition to EVs. I don't think a well thought through relationship between manufacturing and demand for that is created by consumers has been brought together in a way that says there's other factors also, like the fossil fuel levy, for example, which we haven't debated, which has implications for the government. It has to also pay the Gauteng toll road cost, and so there's revenue streams that are coming out of the existing fuel usage of using the conventional cars that has to be also considered. Plus, we are staring job losses in the automotive sectors, and given the US tariffs, that will have massive implications. But I think what we do have is good OEMs that can easily move into that space if the right incentives and demand is created. Now, maybe Neil Hitton can answer this. Is this better in the passenger market, or is it better in the truck or other markets? I don't know the answer to that, but maybe you want to respond about the fuel levies and also the capacity of the existing OEMs to quickly transition to EVs when the incentives are right. And I know they're negotiating the new motor vehicle incentives program. I forget the exact acronym. What your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, so certainly I think all modes of transport have an opportunity to be electrified. It started with passenger cars, but now we're really seeing a radical transition, including South Africa, in terms of electric buses, what's happening in Cape Town. In that we're seeing trucks also. We've got multiple brands of heavy duty and medium duty trucks available in South Africa. So we're really seeing this already coming into play. So the technology is mature. We have the solutions. We have some nuances in our barriers from import duties and production to address, but certainly it's a no-brainer going forward in terms of that. The technology is certainly not the problem, both on the vehicle side and infrastructure side. We need to work on other areas on the barriers in the market. In terms of the fuel levy, I think it's important to note that even as the newer generation of technologies of petrol and diesel vehicles are here today, they're certainly contributing or consuming less petrol per kilometer than what they did 10 years ago. So already from a technology evolution on internal combustion engine vehicles, government is losing revenue on that. It's a natural progression that's happening, but I can say that National Treasury is well aware of this. And this is where we look at broader financial instruments that the Ministry of Finance looks at in terms of polluter pay principle, in terms of the carbon tax and other things that come into play in assisting a transition of legacy revenue from fossil fuels into newer technologies. But I think each government department or each region, like for example, National Treasury, have to look at what can they apply in the South African context to transition. And the last point is it's a case, it's important to highlight, it's not going to be a case that we switch off today and switch on tomorrow as much as we'd like that. It's a natural progression. I think even visiting the streets in Oslo, you still see ICE vehicles. Even if you go to a dealership, they're still maintaining those vehicles. It's not to say that the whole fleet is going to transition overnight. We will have a long-standing supply chain, maintenance and activities across the fossil fuel industry. So it's not going to die overnight. There's still going to be a timeline supporting that as we transition from where we were today to tomorrow in terms of the newer technologies.
Chris, do you mind if I just
Thank you, Hitan, for that. Yeah, come in again, please.
I just want to ask Hitan if there was a comparison done between the present cost of electricity, future costs, expected cost, and whether there is some sufficient competitiveness in price between that and the use of fossil, normal ICE vehicles, and what you
certainly, I think,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's noted that electricity is going to be ever rising costs. I think it's been alluded in the headlines already that our electricity price is too high. But when we look at the opportunities of renewable and utilizing that from an installation capacity, not only for electricity consumption, but also energy for transport, it's a no-brainer if we do that sector coupling of solar batteries to charge EVs on that. So certainly there's a great business case from that. And some of the operators are also working on that business model in South Africa. But it's a win-win situation of utilizing renewable energy infrastructure to support an EV fleet.
Can I ask a question of Philani, if I may? Philani, look, one of the big differences between Norway and South Africa is that South Africa is an importer of liquid fuels, petroleum, diesel, etc. And it strikes me, if we're interested in jobs in South Africa, and if we're interested in price stability in South Africa, it's, by having this huge import of liquid fuels, most of our liquid fuels are now imported. And this is a dollar-denominated commodity. So it's subject to a lot of risk in terms of rate of exchange, and also it's subject to the market price of oil, which we've seen to be quite volatile and ultimately going up. And we could be using our local energy resource, our primary energy resources in South Africa, and I'm not even excluding coal, because that is a local primary energy resource. Wind is a natural resource, and so is our solar resources. And does it not make sense from a jobs perspective, from a perspective of foreign exchange and our balance of payments, and simply on a base of trying to secure the costs from this volatility of the markets, the price of oil, and of course the weakening South African rand? That trend has been going on for the last 20 years and doesn't look to me like it's changing. This poses huge risks for South Africa in terms of costs, and wouldn't it be better to change to our local resources for primary energy rather than imported resources? Over to you, Philani.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Chris. I think, one of the main things and sort of the issues that are under discussion within some of these G20 task forces, especially within the T20, is really the issue of how can not just South Africa, but as a region, how can we encourage a greater the creation of regional value chains? Now, one of that is obviously to utilize the resources that you have naturally. South Africa has a huge potential, but the region also has huge potential in terms of battery technology, in terms of manufacturing of high-tech, goods. And I think this is what you will, if you want to build greater resilience going forward, then that is the path that you have to embark on. I think for me, what's important in the studies that have been carried out and where we heard the findings is that a huge part of the incentive is really cost. So yes, people are, committed, let's say, to a just energy transition, to clean energy. But once you are able to align sort of the innovations and the investments in innovation, the policy frameworks that you're putting in place, and once those start to translate into a clear economic benefit for consumers, then it's quite clear that South Africa possesses huge potential in this front. I mean, another reality is that a lot of the major corporations in the auto manufacturing sector that are invested in South Africa are also companies that are coming, let's say not just North America, but also European companies that are also impacted by the policies in Europe, such as CBAM. So the reality is that for South Africa to stay competitive, it has to make an adjustment in line with global trends. Some of our biggest trade partners and also, political partners, whether within the BRICS or within Europe, are all making that transition. So the reality is that South Africa cannot afford to stay behind the curve. So there's huge potential for that. But as you said, it also builds in a certain degree of resilience moving forward. I think a last point is, both presentations started with the sort of personal experience of taking electric vehicles and traveling around South Africa, given our topography, given, a number of dynamics within the country. I think we need to hear more of those experiences, because there is a perception amongst the consumers that, in fact, it would be difficult, let's say, to own a vehicle, take a drive from Johannesburg to Durban, go to Cape Town, go also to some of the rural areas within South Africa. I think there does need to be some kind of sort of enhanced public dialogue that actually shares the experiences of people who have already made, that switch. And I think that will also contribute, to this landscape. But from a government side, certainly, if you want to sort of decrease, the number, your amount of imports, especially when it comes to energy needs, then certainly moving forward, you would be building a greater degree of resilience amongst, consumers if you are making that transition, but also then supporting it and making it worthwhile in terms of cost. And I see that, the example of Norway shows it's possible, but also the examples of China and other countries also show that it is possible, and that this is a trend that we cannot necessarily afford to be left out of.
Thank you, Dr. Pilani. And now over to Uni. If you've got any further question that you'd like to put to our panel, based on what you've seen in the various questions on the Q&A and your own particular insights that you would like to explore.
Well, first of all, one of the main experiences in Norway is that we have used the purchase tax system already in place and tried to just adjust it a bit to make EVs more affordable and ICE cars less affordable. And this started back in 2006 in Norway, so we have done it over many years. In 2006 was the first year we started to base the purchase tax on cars partly on the emission of the cars. Before that, we had other ways of doing it. So As I've learned here today, you also have quite high purchase taxes in South Africa when it comes to new cars. So that is one of the similarities between our two countries. So I was just wondering, specifically when it comes to this political instrument, would it be possible, you think, to like gradually shift the way the purchase tax is calculated in South Africa? And have you done similar changes or some changes in the earlier stage when it comes to how to calculate the purchase tax on new cars? That is a question to anyone of the panelists who wants to answer. And I can just add that, of course, this change has not been easy in Norway. It has been heavily debated. But overall, the car importers in Norway has actually been in favor of this change because it provides them a way to still sell their products, but to sell better products, so they can compete even in the future. And as an environmentalist, I have been in favor of this way of introducing environmental taxes, because if you introduce them on fuels, then it's quite heavy for people with low income to pay the taxes. But if you introduce them on new products, we know from experience that people buying new cars, they have quite high income. So they can actually just switch the technology, and it is a form of environmental tax that is not affecting people with low income the most. And that is the big advantage of this kind of environmental tax.
I think you're the best position to answer that question of Uni's. Over to you.
Yeah, indeed. I think the review of our fiscal instruments remains a work in progress. I think we did have an engagement with representatives of Ministry of Finance and Treasury. I guess the insight shared in what is available and what can be tweaked remains a work in progress. I think our political landscape in its current form is also facing its challenges against the budget. However, there are these opportunities in that where we say we can leapfrog and take, bridge the ambitions that we want to achieve from South Africa and utilize the existing instruments. I think what is key and what Sweinung also highlighted, if there's no copy and paste. I think we have to acknowledge what worked and didn't work in other regions, but more importantly, what does it mean for South Africa? And how can we bring our social reflections, economic reflections into transitioning of where we need to do? And I think that's remains the main point of opportunity on how do we move forward in South Africa.
Yeah, thanks for that. I want to just pick up on that very point on the question of affordability and the South African context, which is very, very, very different from Norway, which has a much flatter sort of structure, in terms of its income structure across society, whereas South Africa is a highly unequal society with very high income, but a relatively small high income set of earners, and a very large low income earners. And this is a major difference, and it no doubt is going to affect uptake of electric vehicles, because they're not low cost. That is for sure. And so I'm interested to hear about opportunities outside of the electric vehicle market, but into the electric bicycle and the electric motorcycle market. I mean, I was in Vietnam not so long ago, and it just amazed me, the number of motorcycles, in a developing country. I would have thought that South Africa would be, motorcycles would be really big, but actually it's cars that are big in South Africa. I don't know why. But what are the opportunities for electric bicycles and electric motorbikes? And Sveinung, maybe you could pick this up. You've got some experience in the Norwegian market, of course, noting the big differences with South Africa. But what have you seen internationally with electric bicycles and electric motorcycles?
I think that's a really interesting question because there's a lot of potential in two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and we've seen like amazing developments in Asia, and especially China and India, where you see a lot of electric coming on the market. When it comes to two-wheelers in Norway, it's not that common because we have ice on our roads half of the year, so it's really not that popular to own two-wheelers, motorbikes, but and it really hasn't been a political priority, and we don't have the high taxes on petrol motorcycles, giving us that opportunity. But we have seen some subsidy programs on both motorcycles and electric and mopeds, but it's not that widespread. What has been widespread is electric bicycles, which is really encouraging to see. But that's more about like the general how do you make room for more bicycles, pedestrians in a city, and also building the infrastructure for that, which is another part of an important part of reducing emissions in transportation.
Yeah, I did a recent visit to France, to Grenoble, where my daughter lives, and I was amazed at the number of electric bicycles and the whole industry of renting out bicycles and dropping them off at charging points and picking up a bicycle. And it struck me that I wonder why it doesn't happen in South Africa. And somebody told me, now I'm just dreaming, that the theft of bicycles, you can't just park a bicycle at the side of the road like they do in Grenoble and expect it not to be stolen or something. So there are cultural issues, there are technology issues, there are income issues, differences between the countries. But I want to take one last question. And that is from Clyde Mallinson. Clyde, I hope you're still online. I see your hand has been up for a long time. I'm going to allow you to talk now. And if you're there, please switch on your microphone and ask your question to somebody in the audience or somebody in the panel.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks very much for a wonderful webinar as per usual. I have a challenge to all of the panelists. I want to know if I'm going to be able to hedge my bet. So I have a long-standing bet with my son that by 2030, more than 50% of passenger vehicle sales in South Africa will be all electric. If I lose, he has to buy me an EV of my choice. If I win, if I lose, I have to buy him a Ford Mustang. And it's not allowed to be an Ford Mustang. I just want to know, should I hedge my bet, or can the policy and the pricing and all the things we've been discussing today allow us to accelerate the change in South Africa so that I win my bet, even if that Ford Mustang that I might have to buy him swings it to 50%? Is that a realistic target, or am I needing to go and offset my bet? Thanks.
Leighton, I think you got to answer this one. Are we underestimating this uptake of EVs in South Africa, or do you think there's going to be this avalanche effect where there'll be a very sudden change in the way we do it? And do you think Clyde is going to win this bet, of 50% new vehicle sales being EVs in South Africa by 2030? You put your crystal gazing glass on, or your crystal ball, take it out and see what you think of the future in South Africa. Are we ready for this or not?
Yeah, certainly a crystal ball question, Clyde, but none different to what does come up occasionally to say where we are within this. I think from the work that we've done, we see that South Africa is in a window of opportunity, certainly from where we stand to the next 3 to 5 years on shaping this up. It's either the ship has sailed, it's how do we try and catch up in that place. And I think the next 3 to 5 years is really pivotal. And we might lose our auto industry, or we might transform it into being really a global player. And I think this is what is the work required. And through efforts of this, the work that we do is what shapes that up, but also the political will to do that. So, but certainly I think by that timeline, I think some of the key references are speaking of 30% by 2030, 50% by 2050, those sort of numbers. So I think it's quite ambitious, but if we all work together and get to where we need to be, certainly you could be driving that vehicle of your dreams, Clyde.
I'm just not sure if you can get spares for that Ford Mustang, in 10 years' time. I think it's history, but okay, that's just me. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the end of our webinar. It is 12:59, and we're due to end at 1300. It's been a fascinating talk. I've really enjoyed it immensely. It's forward-looking. We've got some strengths in South Africa. We just need to play to our strengths. As Heaton said, we've got this strong component manufacturing industry for ICE cars that is technology agnostic and could be swung over. If we get our policies right, we can change the trajectory. We've been a slow starter, as we usually are. But that's not always a bad thing. That's not always a bad thing. We don't always have to be the technology leaders. Let the Europeans, let Norway pay the costs of driving the price down. Let them learn. We'll learn afterwards. I'm just teasing, but yeah, one doesn't always have to be the technology leader. There's a price to be paid to be a technology leader. And we value what Norway has done because they are bearing the costs that we're going to bear the fruit of. And we've seen this in the solar PV and the battery energy storage thing globally with China as well. So it's left for me to firstly thank our presenters and our panelists today. Uni, thank you for joining us, the head of communication at the Norwegian EV Association, to Sveinung Cavallo. Thank you indeed, Heaton. Heaton, I keep getting it wrong. Heaton Palmer, not Heaton. Heaton Palmer. Thank you for your very valued contribution. Dr. Pelani, it's been wonderful to have your perspective on this webinar. Really a privilege to have somebody of your stature give the opening words and give some context to the South African-Norwegian relationship, which is a long-standing one. To Salim. Salim had to leave earlier, so he's not here right now. But thanks, Salim and the African Climate Foundation for your support and for the support of all of our, the organizations, the Electric Mission, the Institute for Global Dialogue, the African Climate Foundation, and last but not least, in fact, most importantly, the Norwegian EV Association for your participation, your interest, and your help in getting some direction for South Africa based on the learnings of Norway. Not to say that it's a copy and paste, but certainly there are learnings and experiences that we do need to take note of and have taken note of. With that, I also want to just remind the audience of two forthcoming webinars that we're working on. They haven't yet been publicly announced, but they will be soon. The first one is on the South African electricity wholesale market, SAWEM, South African Wholesale Electricity Market, SAWEM. Very important development that is underway at the moment. We hope that this market will be in place as soon as possible. There's a lot of work being done on it, and we're going to have some real experts at the forefront of the development of the South African wholesale electricity market speaking to us, in September, early in September, and thereafter, probably in October, or maybe as late as November, but another webinar on virtual power plants. And of course, electric vehicles, fit into this discussion when one's talking about, vehicle to grid and vehicle to home. In other words, a standby system for the home when the power fails. We'd have that quite often in South Africa, although it's lessened to some extent of recent months. So vehicle to home is a very important topic, as well as vehicle to grid, which is part of this virtual power plant. If we can dispatch thousands of electric vehicles to generate power during peak periods when it's needed, and most in winter, this can really save a lot of money in South Africa by reducing the need for generation reserve capacity. if one's able to harness a dual use technology that's used for transport, but a technology that can also be used for powering the home and also feeding power back into the grid to reduce grid demand. So it's very exciting, possibilities, and we're going to explore them in our further webinars. So with that, thank you very much to you, the audience, for being present. It's been wonderful to have you, and thanks again to our presenters and sponsors. All the best. Thank you.